Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Gooey's Dungeon Dive. And this week, I have to try my best to collect all of my thoughts on the Water Temple, one of the most notorious dungeons in the whole series, I would say. And we'll get to why. But first of all, we're continuing our trend of interacting with characters that we forged bonds with as a child, and now are meeting up once again with as a grown-up. In this case, we are reunited with Princess Ruto, who is also in the Water Temple to help free her people of the curse coming from within. Sitting at the bottom of Lake Hylia, the dungeon is, of course, water-themed, which comes across in its gameplay in multiple ways. But also, like the forest and the fire temple, there is a much deeper and more mysterious feeling to this dungeon. The musical theme helps set this tone, as it has a melody that cascades almost like water, while it's accompanied by a more impending, kind of darker backing track underneath. So as I said, this dungeon is water themed, and not just because it has aquatic enemies and a lot of cool set pieces based around water, which it does, but its fundamental gameplay also revolves around water. This leads to probably the two most controversial elements of this dungeon. One thing I want to get out of the way first because I feel it's more of a flaw in the gameplay of the original and has since been corrected with the 3DS version, and that is, of course, the use of the iron boots to navigate in the water. They're key to that, obviously, because they make you sink, but in the original version of the game, of course, it was very annoying because you had to pause every time you wanted to use the item and go to your gear screen, which is a big pain in the butt. But luckily, this has been corrected in the 3DS remake, and now they're an equipable item, allowing them to be switched on and off at a moment's notice. Now to get to what I love about this dungeon, which is still probably kind of controversial for other people, is its water theme as expressed through its central mechanic. Similar to the Swamp Palace in A Link to the Past, this dungeon revolves around raising and lowering the water level in the dungeon. The Water Temple takes this whole idea a step further, though, in that instead of being a room-to-room type situation, the water level actually affects the status of the whole dungeon practically. On top of that, the water can only be changed at very specific points in the dungeon, adding to the complexity of the navigation. The dungeon is centered around this large central room with branching paths going off from them, and when the water is at a certain level, only certain rooms may be accessible. And even then, depending on the water level, you may only be able to perform specific acts in those rooms, having to backtrack later with the water at an appropriate level, or maybe even having the appropriate item that works in that room, and so on. One of my favorite puzzles in the whole series makes use of this, actually. So before you even can change the water level for the first time in this dungeon, in one of the offshoot rooms, you float up past a cracked wall, and of course you can't bomb it since it's underwater. Above that room, you can now lower the water, though the cracked wall will still not be accessible until you raise the water back up in a different area to the second level so you can reach it again. This allows you to then backtrack and come and blow up that wall. This is actually a great use of a wall bombing puzzle in a 3D Zelda game. Even the dungeon item, the long shot, has this sort of effect. Many people aren't fond of it, and I understand why. It doesn't fundamentally change the gameplay, but it does fit well into the navigation of the dungeon. Once you get it, there's a few areas you'll hopefully remember you have to return to with the water at a certain level to complete certain puzzles. Now, once you take all of those elements and combine it with optional stuff like map, compass, and gold sculptulas, stuff like that in these offshoot rooms, as well as remembering the locations where you can actually change the water, this becomes a very difficult dungeon to keep track of where you have or haven't been. Keys, once again, they act more as a reward for working out some of the navigational challenges, and there's also, of course, a lot of more memorable puzzle and set piece moments in this dungeon. I think I can understand why this is tricky for some people, and even I'm not super opposed to the decision they made to add like markers that lead to where the water level spots are, but I actually think this whole puzzle of the dungeon is phenomenal. It's one that really pushes the series forward in a way that I loved, similar to like Eagle's Tower, for example. Beyond the memorable moments this dungeon delivers with the overarching puzzle and some of its cool room-to-room action, it also has some very memorable moments from its enemies. The most obvious one that comes to mind is its very iconic, maybe the most iconic mini-boss in the series so far, Dark Link. Or maybe in this case, Dark Goo. Dark Link takes a thematic cue from Shadow Link, I believe it was, in Adventure of Link, and ties that within the darker, more mysterious edge of this dungeon that I mentioned before. You know, it's an amazing setting. As you enter the room, it's just this giant, seemingly endless room, and sort of meant to play into the reflective nature of water. Dark Link is meant to be our dark reflection coming out to confront us. This shows off in the mechanics of the fight as well, so I like that. It's very whole, if you ask me. Now, the way that is when you target him, he'll actually either block or even sometimes counter our attacks. But, you know, there's a multiple items that you can use against him to beat him. But the key thing I love about this fight is that the real way to beat him is to stop targeting him. And I always kind of thought of this as the ability to confront or defeat your dark side by letting go and trusting in your abilities or something like that. Also, after beating him, the room kind of transforms into a more normal room, which like dispels the whole illusion. You know, it's a basic fight, but I think it's really cool conceptually. And I love how it's a nice bit of lore that's not like fully explained, much like the spiritual nature of the rest of these adult dungeons. That's an aspect I really love. But of course, we've got to mention the final boss, which is the giant aquatic amoeba, Morpha. This boss also takes that water concept to a new level, let's say. Morpha is this weird little red nucleus that can control all of the water in the room, which makes me even more scared to go in it. It's able to make these water tentacles that try and grab us and throw us around the room, which deal a lot of damage and are very annoying. The way to defeat this creature is pretty straightforward. It's just to long shot and pull the nucleus out of the water, making it vulnerable to attack, and of course all while dodging its tentacles that try to grab you. As the fight goes on, it spawns another one that you have to look out for, and you know, I've never really loved this fight. I even tried getting better at the cheese kind of strategy of standing in the corner to sort of trap it and, you know, speed up the fight as a whole. But again, conceptually, it's still pretty cool, and the cutscene after it's defeated, showing all the water draining up from the room, is pretty cool. But the fight itself, not my favorite. When we defeat this dungeon, we are reunited once again with Rudo, who wishes she could grant her eternal love promised to us. But no, she must stay to guard the water temple and look after her people. So, of course, once again, nice little touch. I even like, there's been all these scenes after defeating the dungeons of things kind of going back to normal. And I really like this scene afterwards of the lake filling and talking to Sheik, especially after Rudo's like, thank Sheik for us. We've kind of got the Sheik mystique continuing. Love it. Good story moment stuff. And overall, a fantastic, phenomenal dungeon. You know, some weakness there, but overall, I just love it. I don't even know what to say. I love those dungeons where the whole dungeon is the puzzle, and we've seen two dungeons really take that concept and blow it out of the water, you know? We led into Link's Awakening, which really expanded upon, like, the key element of, like, picking at the knot. A Link to the Past had that too, but Link's Awakening, Eagle's Tower really did something new with that, and we even saw in that how keys were, like, hardly a factor, and in this we see how keys are required for sure. You're looking for them. It's all about hunting for them, but it's not about, you know, it's not the push and pull of, like, find a key, where should I spend it type thing. No, it's all about this water level and the navigation with it, and everything ties to that so well. It's obviously hard to cover. There's so many great puzzles involving it. So much oh, I gotta remember that type thing. Like, oh, I gotta bomb the floor here, but the water's full, or, oh, I can't reach that. Look, it's gonna be my number one dungeon. It beats Eagle's Tower for me. They're actually notably different, and I like that. The Eagle's Tower puzzle actually has this, it's great bit of non-linearity. I truly love that. But this is just so much more grand, and the idea of you're constantly changing the status, you know, on these 3 different levels really puts it over to me. Whereas Eagle's Tower, it's cool because you had these 4 non-linear points, and these other things you could get non-linearly, but it was kind of really more built around moving up and down those crystal switch blocks, and, you know, okay, I gotta get from here to there, you know, good stuff with that. Don't get me wrong, it's my number 2 dungeon, but Water Temple is so strongly at number 1 for me. I think it's the best dungeon in this game, actually, but we'll see. We're gonna test that theory. In fact, we'll just keep it going. We'll keep it going on. Next week, probably gonna do Bottom of the Well, right? So we'll see you then. And we're getting close to the end, sort of. And there's gonna be a couple list changes still, because I'm looking at some, and as I'm bumping down some older dungeons, I'm thinking, no, this one needs to be in the top 5 or maybe the top 10 by the end of Ocarina of Time. Maybe not by the end of the series. And so I'm going to get to those for sure. Depends on where I place some of these other Ocarina of Time dungeons, though. So maybe I'm going to wait till the finale. We'll see. Either way, hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you enjoyed the Water Temple. I know I didn't talk about I could talk about every room in this, actually. I think there's a lot of great, memorable rooms, but I really got to keep these brief. So hopefully I explained this well. It's a very complicated dungeon to try to explain, but nonetheless, thanks for watching, and I will see you next week.